We have some unfinished business from Thursday. There were some slides we didn't go through, so let's go through them. First, this article appeared yesterday in the South China Morning Post. China, meaning mainland, is open to idea of a digital currency as long as it's efficient and safe. Well, that may let out a lot of digital currencies. Central Bank Governor Zhou says financial system must not be disrupted. After it banned cryptocurrency exchanges and declared all initial coin offerings illegal, China is still open to the idea of a digital currency if it doesn't disrupt the financial system, Central Bank Governor Zhou Zhaochang said on Friday. Now, the problem with him is he's outgoing. He's not going to be the governor long. The government will be happy to accept those that bring efficiency, low cost, and safety to consumers as long as they don't directly conflict with the current financial stability and financial order. We don't want to create products for speculation. The illusion of getting rich overnight is not a good thing, the outgoing PBOC chief said. Well, I think he's probably right about that they don't want to create products for speculation, and they don't want people to believe they're going to get rich overnight, but instead lose all their money. If they believe they're going to get rich overnight, and they really do get rich overnight, you're not going to stop people. It's going to be a gold rush. On the other hand, there are many people who have lost a bundle in these currencies, and a small number of people have made a bundle. It's difficult for me to see how a decentralized currency that's not under the control of a government can fail to affect the financial order. So I think what he's basically saying is, we'll do it if it's possible, but we secretly know it's impossible. Unless the government sponsors the currency. And then it loses many of the features of digital currency that are desirable to some people, like anonymity, for example, and lack of centralized control, and lack of reporting of financial transactions. That'll go away if the currency is created by a bank. Yeah, all right. So, Bitcoin. What we talked about was that regardless of the future of Bitcoin itself, there was a major invention associated with it called the blockchain. And the blockchain has taken on a life of its own. There was a company in the United States, a food company, that changed its name, and it added blockchain to its name, and immediately its stock price doubled, just because investors believed that the company was getting into blockchain. So if you want a startup, okay, this will work for the next few months, then it won't work anymore, but put blockchain in your name and you will guaranteed to attract investor interest. Now, the blockchain's a great idea for certain things, but not for everything. And one thing it's not a good idea for is cash equivalent, which is what Bitcoin is. Why is there a need to keep a record of every Bitcoin transaction there has ever been in history in the blockchain? Why do you need that? You don't need that. Eventually what's going to happen is that Bitcoin will engage in gravitational collapse. There'll be so much data that you have to carry around in order to verify this next $15 transaction that it won't be worth it anymore. For example, you're all carrying cash on you. There's no record anywhere of where that cash, the parties to whom that cash went. We don't have that record. We can look at the cash and we can tell that it's legitimate if we're an expert, right? Forgery is difficult but not impossible. You don't have to keep a record of every cash transaction. And what nobody did with blockchain is nobody figured out how to do garbage collection. What you could do is pick a moment in time, go through the blockchain, figure out how much Bitcoin is associated with each address that has a non-zero amount, and you could erase all the back transactions and start from there, as if they had been granted that Bitcoin on day one. And as long as you make that record unforgeable, and everybody gets to verify it, as soon as it comes out, it gets compared against the real blockchain. And when a majority of the nodes agree, then you just discard the old blockchain. But that's not part of Bitcoin. And so you have to think of, with these chains of title, there are certain things where you really need a chain of title. Land, you really need a chain of title. Securities, you don't really. Because once the stock is registered on the books of the corporation, it doesn't matter who the past owners were. It only matters who the future owners are. And so blockchain is useful for certain things, not everything. And you have to be able to garbage collect. You just can't keep a record forever of every transaction. So here are some companies that are using blockchain for non-currency purposes. For example, Walmart digitally tracked the movement of pork in China on a blockchain. So this is also happening in the pharmaceutical industry, FDA. You want to make sure that tainted food or food from unknown sources does not enter the supply chain. You want to make sure that counterfeit drugs do not enter the supply chain. When I say drugs, I'm talking about honest pharmaceuticals. I'm not talking about illegal drugs. And the question is, by looking at a drug container, you can't tell if it was legitimately manufactured or whether it's counterfeit. And the problem with counterfeit medication is not just that the wrong people get rich. It's that very often the medicine is fake. It just looks like the right pill, but it doesn't have any active ingredients in it. And so if you're depending on that for your life, you'll get very sick very fast, and it may be difficult for the doctors to figure out what's wrong with you. So we want to keep that stuff out of the supply chain. Now, don't get confused between blockchain and supply chain. They're both chains, but one's physical and one's digital. And so the idea is to use blockchain to track the pork from its source all the way through the supply chain, how it's transported, where it gets stored, until it finally ends up at a food retailer. That way, if you have a complete record of all those transfers, then when there's some counterfeit pork or unauthorized pork or not properly heated pork, whatever, then you'll know, because it won't be part of the blockchain record of the transfers. The same thing is true of drugs, and this has actually been implemented. They put an RFID in the cap of the drug bottle. And that RFID is just a serial number. And there's a global database of every pharmaceutical container. And when a manufacturer makes one, he puts against the serial number, he makes an entry in that global database that said, I manufactured this drug on this date, it has this lot number, it's official, this is the dose, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Then he makes a record that he's shipping it to the following dock where it's going to get put on a boat. Then when it gets there, the RFIDs get scanned, and an automatic entry is made that says, this boat has received this drug. Then when it lands in its destination port, the same thing happens. When it's offloaded from at the port, all those RFIDs are scanned, and an entry is made in the global database. This drug with this serial number was received at this dock. Then it goes to a warehouse. Then it goes to a pharmacy. Then it gets dispensed to a patient. And at all times, all you have to do is scan the RFID, and you can verify the chain, not of title exactly, but the chain of custody of this drug bottle. And if a drug bottle shows up whose serial number doesn't correspond to something in the database, you don't touch it, because you don't know where it came from, so you can't be sure about it. And those are excellent uses of blockchain. Why? Because drug bottles don't have an infinite life. Eventually, the drug will be used up. Eventually, the drug will expire and get thrown away, which means you don't need a record anymore of where that drug went. So you can expunge it from the blockchain if you want to. Whereas money doesn't disappear. That's the problem. One of the problems with Bitcoin is it's keeping a record of every transaction since day one. Now, day one wasn't that long ago for Bitcoin. 100 years from now, day one will be a long time ago. And if Bitcoin ever gets really, really, really popular, the number of transactions is going to be so large that you won't be able to carry around the blockchain anymore. So there's something fundamentally wrong there. Okay. IBM has launched a proof of concept distributed ledger with half a dozen members of IBM Global Finance. Using the distributed ledger technology, IBM Global Finance was able to reduce the backlog from 44 to less than 10 days, freeing up millions of dollars in payment delays. So what this is showing is different industries are looking at blockchain and seeing, oh, how can that help us? They're not so much looking at Bitcoin. They're looking at blockchain, the concept of blockchain. And it can revolutionize a bunch of industries, particularly anything having to do with supply chain, where it's really important to make sure that you can track the movement of goods to make sure that they haven't been hijacked, they haven't been substituted, et cetera. Okay, smart contracts. So this is a fairly brilliant idea. And it's tied to the Ethereum blockchain, which is you can think of it as, in a sense, as a competitor of Bitcoin. See, the problem with Bitcoin is because nobody controls it. I can take that code, which is open source, and I can say, I'm starting blockchain 2. You want some blockchain 2? Here you go. Just download my copy of the client. I'm going to set up my own network. It's going to be totally independent of the original Bitcoin network. And all of a sudden, we have a digital currency. So there's nothing proprietary about blockchain. Nobody can stop competition. You can stop watering down Bitcoin, but you can't stop competitors from showing up and creating alternatives. And that's why there are 1,500 different digital currencies now. So one of the concepts of Ethereum is it's not tied quite so much to currency, although there is one. And in fact, it has the second largest market cap. But the concept of a smart contract. Smart contract is a computer program in a secure environment, for example, blockchain, that directly controls digital assets. What's a digital asset? Some of them are simple. A movie is a digital asset. If you want to view a movie, you're supposed to pay for it. Okay. Money is now a digital asset because money is represented digitally. It's represented that way in Bitcoin. It's represented that way in bank accounts, etc. So if I want to pay you, I can pay you digitally. All I have to do is send a payment instruction to a bank, an irrevocable payment instruction, and you will be paid. So let's suppose we have a contract between us. And the contract states that upon the occurrence of a certain event, for example, you release your boatload of bananas, your 10 million US worth of bananas. When you release your boatload of bananas, you get paid 10 million US dollars. That can all be done completely electronically without the control of any human being. Because as soon as it's recorded that you release the bananas, everything else can happen automatically. It doesn't depend on me or my bank or anything doing anything. You can get paid automatically if a computer program injects the payment order into the payment system. Outside the control of anybody, I won't be able to stop it anymore. Why? Because the code for this program will be recorded in the blockchain and will automatically get executed. So, smart contracts basically are computer programs that implement contracts that humans have agreed upon. They're very easy to read, actually. There are smart contract languages in which the lines in the code correspond to things you would expect to see in a contract. In order for all this to work, you need a guarantee of correct execution. So this contract is written in a computer-like language, but then there has to be a compiler or interpreter that correctly interprets these lines. And you have to be sure that that interpreter doesn't have bugs. That's not so easy. The way you do that is with open source code. You let the entire world see the execution code. The code has to remain, you have to protect its integrity. You have to make sure that nobody has altered it, because if you alter the code, then you can't trust it anymore. And any data that's being supplied to the code, like the amount of money I'm supposed to pay you, we don't want that to be altered. Well, if you don't want things altered, you put them in the blockchain. Then nobody can alter them. We need to authenticate the parties. So before I can sign a contract under my name or my bank account, you have to be sure it's me. So we have to worry about that. And then, of course, we like confidentiality, because these people generally don't want outsiders to know the terms of the contracts that they're entering into with other people. The programs in Ethereum are written in a simple language and they're compiled into bytecode. So there's an Ethereum virtual machine. It's similar in concept to Java, but it's not Java. The Ethereum virtual machine, you can download the VM yourself. It interprets this smart contract language, so it can execute contracts. So here is a map of distributed ledger technology. So what happens here is, if you look at the size of the ledger is this axis, and the number of ledgers that exist that have that size. That's what this is a chart of. And so there are huge, large public distributed ledger technologies. Bitcoin, Ethereum, Sovereign, etc. They're very big ledgers because they're recording everything since day one. There are a small number of them. On the other hand, as you get to private distributed ledgers that would be only within a corporation. I told you about Mellon Bank NA that handles 25 trillion US in assets. They have to make sure that they don't lose control of that and that some hacker doesn't break in and run roughshod over their records. So they have a private distributed ledger. It's not something that you can access, but it is distributed and it's trusted because it's all the different components of the bank. And then there are a large number of very small specialty distributed ledgers that are just used for very particular purposes without the intention of making them ever very large. These are large because the Bitcoin blockchain records every Bitcoin transaction there's ever been in the world. There may millions of people ultimately may be involved in that. Whereas these ledgers are only recording a small amount of data that involves a single corporation or something like that. Smart contracts then. So small computer programs can execute complex contracts. Specific actions can be verified by third parties because what the contract is going to do is it's going to enter its transaction information into the blockchain. It's going to say, oh, I just sent a payment order to the bank for this payment, and here it is. And that's going to get entered into the blockchain so everybody can verify it. These actions, once they occur, for example, the delivery of the bananas to the dock. When the dock gets it and it's loaded on the freighter, an entry gets made that says the bananas got loaded. Now, that information, once it gets in the blockchain, can be verified by everybody, including smart contracts that are watching the blockchain, waiting for, ooh, have the bananas been loaded yet? Ooh, the bananas have been loaded? Okay, there's an if bananas loaded, then pay 10 million US dollars. Then the program will execute the payment order to cause the $10 million to be paid. So everything gets recorded in the blockchain and can never be altered later because the proof of work makes it impossible for other people to do it. So here's an example. Workers scan IDs which are verified by a government database. Work begins, so you make stuff. Finished products automatically summon delivery trucks. So as the stuff is coming off the production line, eventually there'll be enough that we can load a truck and ship it. The smart contract with a logistics provider says that when we've made enough to fill 80% of a truck, then the truck will be summoned automatically. We don't even need a human to get involved in that, except, of course, probably the truck driver, but only for another 10 years. I mean, after that, the truck drivers won't exist. The truck will just drive itself there. Okay? When the driver scans a box, a carton has an RFID on it, and he scans a box, it triggers a payment from the video game company to the factory. So the video game company just received the processors. They arrived. As soon as they're scanned, an entry gets made in the blockchain that says they have been delivered. And then there's another smart contract that's watching. Notification of delivery. When they get delivered, automatically a payment occurs. So, you don't need corporate controllers anymore. It's very simple. That's the world of smart contracts. So there's a predefined contract. Terms are established by all the parties. For example, what currency the payment is to be made in, what exchange rate we're going to use. If there's a variable interest rate, which one are we going to use? LIBOR rate, for example. LIBOR stands for London Interbank Offered Rate. Okay, it's a rate that's basically negotiated among banks in London to decide on what the current bank interest rate ought to be. And there was a big scandal a few years ago in which they manipulated the LIBOR because it was a small oligarchy of banks that got together and decided what was good for them. It was not necessarily good for all of us. I've actually been involved in contracts which have a clause that says the rate will be the LIBOR rate. And all those contracts ended up getting manipulated. Okay, so there's a contract. And the contract is expressed in this contract computer language. Then there are events. There are events that trigger contract execution. The loading of stuff onto a truck, for example. Now, how do we know that happened? We know that happened because there's authentication of the guy who entered the transaction, and it gets recorded in the blockchain. And we can easily verify that it happened. The terms of the contract dictate movement of value based on conditions. So the contract says, if this, then you get paid. When this happens, you get paid. When that happens, I get paid. And so there's a computer program that's watching the blockchain for the satisfaction of these conditions and then causes money to move. So for digital assets on the chain, such as a cryptocurrency, accounts are atomically settled. That means they're automatically settled real-time gross settlement. Each payment gets made, let's say, through Ethereum or something like that. For assets represented off the chain, such as stocks, fiat currency, changes to accounts in the ledger will match the off-chain settlement instructions. So you can't put everything on the blockchain. I mean, you can't put physical goods on the blockchain. And so there has to be a connection between the events on the blockchain and events in the real world. That's the concept. This is going places. The lawyers are already professing to know a lot about this, which they don't. And they're trying to convince their clients smart contracts are the way to go. So if you go online and look for smart contracts, you will see a lot of PDF files produced by law firms trying to sell their services to their clients to advise them on smart contracts. So here's an example of a language in which you might express a contractual term. Okay? So arrange a debt. High Street Bank owes Acme Corporation 100,000 British pounds. Okay? That's a debt, right? When I sign the loan documents with my bank to borrow money, then they have to give me the money. But I have to agree to the conditions first before they'll give me the money. Now, here is a redemption of a zero coupon bond. Arrange actions. Acme Corporation may, that means it's option. It doesn't have to. Acme Corporation may can exercise this right after June 1st, 2018. So after 2018-06-1, Acme Bank owes, ABC Bank owes Acme Corporation 100,000 British pounds. So you can see that it's an elementary language. It's sort of human readable. It's not exactly contract language, but that's okay because contract language is often ambiguous. This cannot be ambiguous because it's a computer program. No computer program is ambiguous. That doesn't mean you understand what it says, but the compiler does. Yeah. Okay, so the major ideas for cryptocurrencies. Virtual currencies based on blockchain are real. They exist. Whether they should exist or not, or whether they represent value, it's up to you. Blockchain is the Bitcoin innovation that will survive, even if Bitcoin doesn't. Numerous entities are building and implementing private blockchains, like Bank of New York Mellon. The adoption is massive and extending to multiple business sectors, particularly healthcare and electronic voting. So healthcare, you want to make sure that you have an indelible record of everything that's happened to you, your body, and its treatments. Why? Because when you go to a doctor, let's suppose you're brought into a hospital unconscious. They need to be able to find out your entire medical record. What is your blood type? What are you allergic to? What have you been treated for? What are your known conditions? You can't tell them because you're unconscious. If you have an ID and they can look up the trusted blockchain of your medical record, and only authorized medical providers will be able to do that, then your medical care will be better. And you may be able to avoid dying on that particular day. Lawyers are involved, which proves that smart contracts are a reality. because lawyers don't do anything unless they get paid. Trust me, I know. I am one. Cryptocurrencies raise significant policy and law enforcement issues. We just saw the South China Morning Post article about the PBOC governor saying, well, these things might be okay as long as they don't destroy financial stability. All right. We will do no more on cryptocurrency, so this is your chance to ask any questions lingering in your mind about it. Okay. Now we can do today. In lecture 1, I said that electronic payment is only one part of the e-business process. It's a very important part because everybody wants to get paid, but it's only one part. And unless you're involved in corporate payments, you may not appreciate the magnitude of this issue. Everything that you buy, everything that you pay for, you have a record of it in your head and you remember it. That's not true in a corporation. There's no human head that remembers everything that the corporation did. There might be a database that does, but there isn't a human. And so everything is different in the commercial world, and that's why we need electronic invoice presentment and payment. Presentment is a very strange word. It's English, yeah, it exists. But usually it means a feeling about something. I have a presentiment that it's going to rain tomorrow. That's the way it's usually used in English. In the financial world, presentment is a synonym for presenting. Okay? If I present you with a check, if I hand you a check, that's officially called a presentment in the financial world. So it has a special meaning there. But it just means the same thing as handing over, giving. Okay? Electronic invoice presentment means sending a bill. That's all it is, sending a bill. Then we're going to talk about instant payment and the future of payments. And the future of payments go beyond Bitcoin. Okay. So, electronic invoice presentment and payment. If you can present the invoice electronically instead of on paper, it saves everybody a lot of bother and time. Why? Because you can send these things quickly from one place to another. You can't send paper quickly from one place to another. So presentment is displaying a notification of a debt along with its details. That's what a bill is. So when you get a bill from the phone company, it's not just a number, but it contains a listing of the services that you used, including long-distance telephone calls and your wireless charges and your data charges and all that stuff. So when you go to a restaurant and you get a bill, they list all the things that you ate. It's not just a number, but it's an invoice. Okay? So you tell how much is owed along with the details so that the recipient can verify that he really got that stuff and that he really owes you that money. Sometimes you'll see EIPP called electronic bill presentment and payment, EBPP. These are synonyms because an invoice and a bill are synonyms of one another. But somehow in the commercial world, they think that the word invoice is fancier than the word bill. So you and I, ordinary minor citizens, we get bills. Corporations get invoices, okay? But they're the same thing, right? Sometimes it's also called electronic statement delivery, ESD. So a statement means a list of how much you owe me. There are differences in the B2C world versus the B2B world. We talked something about that before. In large, you have to interact with existing legacy systems, accounts receivable and accounts payable systems that corporations have. Individuals tend not to have these things. If at home you have an accounts payable system, then you're probably obsessive compulsive. But there are some people who do this. My wife does, for example. We're going to talk about the parties that are involved in EIPP. There are some extra folks now. It's no longer just the buyer and the seller, but there are some other agents that get involved, and they're called service providers or bill consolidators. We'll look at the architecture of such systems. Then, in an amazing footnote, I'm going to show you how it may not be necessary to have invoices at all. Even though all this infrastructure exists for sending and processing invoices, they might not be necessary. And then we'll talk about instant payment and how that works, and the Amazon Go store, which is pretty fascinating. We'll have some pictures of that. Okay, so here is a map of the bill payment ecosystem. You can see that it's pretty big. There's lots of stuff here. And so payment, which is what we've been talking about during this course, is this stuff in blue down here. But there's a lot of other information that's necessary in order to send a bill, pay a bill, record the fact that the bill's been paid, record on both ends. The guy who paid it needs to remember that he paid it so he doesn't pay it twice. And the guy he pays it to needs to know he paid it so he can cross that off the record. It's no longer an account receivable because it's been received. Now, in order to do that, you have to have databases, data warehouses that record all the information that's going to go into the bills. To process the actual payments, you need financial institutions. And then you have these guys called consolidators who collect all the bills from all the different folks and present them on a consistent interface to whoever has to pay. Settlement endpoints. These are places that are actually going to receive money. User interfaces are how various people, consumers, agents, employees of corporations, people who send bills, how do they interact with the system? And then there's all this bill processing information. How do you collect all the individual line items, gather them together into a bill, make sure the bill is in the right format, the right amount, has the right invoice number on it, has the right purchase order number on it, and send it to the correct destination. So there are guys that do that. These are the e-billers. So it's a big space, and we've only really talked pretty much about this part before. Okay, so here's traditional consumer bill payment. This is the consumer level, not the business level. Here's you, happy, sitting at your laptop. Of course, you're happy until the bill arrives. Then you're not happy because you have to pay it. So in the traditional scheme, the biller, this is the person that's rendered services to the consumer, so the consumer owes money to the biller. The biller mails a bill. It's your phone bill. And what happens in my house is that the bill gets opened and looked at and gets put in a pile. And then once or twice a month, when my wife has enough energy and is in the right mood, she will go through the bills and make entries into her bookkeeping system to pay them. But it's painful because every bill represents money out, and you don't want to think about that. Okay? So the consumer gets the bill, and right now they go to online banking, and their bank has a bill payment app that allows you to set up a payment to the phone company. And then, from then on, we know what happens. That becomes an ACH transaction. The bank will, that night, will introduce that transaction into the clearinghouse, or on the day you say you want it introduced into the clearinghouse. There will be a clearing process and a settlement process, and ultimately, at least on a net basis, the biller's bank is going to end up with the money corresponding to that bill, and so now the biller has the money because it's in his bank account. It's a traditional process. It starts out with paper, and from then on it's electronic. And the whole idea of EIPP is to make that part electronic also. Okay. This is just a bunch of these abbreviations. They're largely the same thing. There's a lot of B's in there. Bill presentment and payment, invoice, statement, document, statement. Now you'll hear the term MBPP, mobile bill presentment and payment. Now when you're sitting on an MTR with your device, you can receive your bills right while you're riding, and you can pay them if you want to. Okay. So the purpose of electronic billing, at least in the corporate sense, is to reduce order-to-pay time, or to reduce service rendered to pay time. In the United States, most commercial invoices are referred to as net 30, which means that I'm going to ask you for $10,000, And if you pay within 30 days, that's the amount you pay. If you take longer, you might have to pay more, because there might be a penalty or there might be interest charges that accumulate after 30 days. Sometimes, very commonly actually, in commercial invoices, they'll say net 30, 2% 10. So that's an abbreviation for you get a discount if you pay fast. So net 30, 2% 10. So if it's USD $10,000, then that's the amount you pay if you pay within 30 days. However, if you pay within 10 days, you can take a 2% discount off of that. So you will pay $9,800 if you pay within 10 days. Now, 2% for 10 days is 72% annually, right? Because there are 36 10-day periods in a year. Everybody desperately tries to take that discount if they can. If their cash flow will permit, this is the cheapest money that they're ever going to find. Basically, they're saving themselves 72% a year. Now, as it turns out, most companies are completely incapable of taking that discount, not because they don't have the money. It's because they can't process the invoice fast enough. If it takes them 11 days to process the invoice, it's already too late to take the 2% discount. So in the United States, the average delay in paying a 30-day invoice is 42 days. Why? Because after the invoice is sent, let's say it's sent, to receive it and route it properly within the corporation. Why? When an invoice comes, they don't know if they should pay it. They don't know if it's fake. They don't know if there was a proper purchase order that corresponds to it. They don't know if the goods were received. They don't know if the goods were received in good condition. They don't know if the right goods were received. They have to check. And how do they check? Well, they don't just call somebody up on the phone. They route a request. There's a form. It gets routed to a person for his signature. And then after he signs it, somebody else has to sign it. And then somebody else signs it. And it takes 10 to 50 days to do this. And then to approve the invoice, well, as soon as the invoice shows up on my desk, I have other things to do. It's going to go in a pile. And when I have time, then I'm going to go through the pile and start approving the invoices. So it takes time. Then, of course, somebody has to decide to pay the invoice, even if it's authorized. The controller of the corporation may not want to pay it because he realizes he can earn interest on the money instead of paying it out to the supplier. So it turns out that over 50% of invoices in the United States are past due by the time they arrive at the accounts payable department. When they arrive there, it means they've been approved. The company should pay. But by now, it's over 30 days. Available discounts, 2%, net 10, out of reach for many payers because they just can't process the invoice in 10 days. 10 to 20% of invoices involve some exception process. An exception process is something's wrong with the invoice. There's one line item on there, we didn't receive that. You don't expect me to pay for things I didn't get. So what most companies do is they don't pay anything. And they flag the invoice as defective. And then there's a long process between human beings calling each other up. And of course, the honest thing to do would be to pay the rest of the invoice, to pay for everything you did get, and only dispute the one line. But of course, why do that when you don't have to? So there's a tremendous amount of delay and cost associated with fixing bad invoices. So the cost to process and pay an invoice is estimated at over 100 Hong Kong dollars. If there's an exception and humans have to get involved, it goes up to $300. Now, this is per invoice. And there are a lot of companies. How many invoices do you think PCCW sends in a month? Millions, probably. Okay? And so if it costs 100 Hong Kong to create an invoice, then that's a huge amount of money per month. Okay. So this is the process of electronic invoice presentment and payment. and it's in red here. This is the entire e-commerce process, or the commerce process. So here's the seller, and here's the buyer, supplier and customer. The supplier offers a product. The customer scans, either electronically or with his eyeballs, product information, look at the catalog of goods, and then sends an order. The supplier then accepts the order and confirms to the customer, yes, you've got an order, we will deliver this in a certain number of days. Okay? Then the supplier has to actually either make the goods or pull them out of the warehouse, transport them, and deliver them to the buyer. The buyer receives the goods and looks at them to make sure it's what they ordered. At that point, the supplier will have sent a bill. When he sends the goods, he sends a bill. The bill has to be processed and verified against the vendor's invoice. The vendor's invoice has to be matched up with a purchase order. This order that went to the supplier, whatever was listed in there should be the same stuff that's listed in there. If it's not, then there's something wrong. Then once this is done, the verification of the invoice, payment will eventually be made. Goes to accounts payable, and their job is to schedule a payment order to a bank. They have to figure out what bank, what account, what currency. That's their business. Then the supplier, when they receive the money, they have to mark off that this invoice that they sent has been paid. Otherwise, they lose total control of their accounts receivable. Then after that, we drop out of the EIPP process, and then there's physical interaction between the buyer and the seller in case the goods are defective or the seller wants to sell you more stuff. Like you just bought a camera, now he wants to sell you SD cards for the camera, he wants to sell you lenses for the camera. Well, that's outside of the EIPP process. So what we're going to do here today is talk about what goes on in the red. Okay, so what is EIPP? This is one example of it. Statements or bills are rendered on the web instead of being rendered in paper. So the idea here is billers, and they're plural because you don't just get one bill per month. You get a bill from everybody you owe money to. So it's a whole bunch of bills. So the billers, it would be a real pain for you if you received 50 emails per month and you had to individually do something with each of them. So in order to make the process simpler, the billers send their bills not directly to you, but to a consolidator. In this case, it's named InExchange. This is a guy who receives bills, sorts them by who you are, and then when you visit his site, all of your bills are presented on one screen, so you can see all of them. That wouldn't happen if 50 different billers sent you 50 different emails. They would never be consolidated anywhere. So step one is the billers send the bills to InExchange, who consolidates them. Then you, the consumer, when you feel you want to pay your bills this month, you visit the site of the consolidator, and you look at all your bills. And there'll be buttons on there that say, pay, and maybe there's a field that says date on which you want to make the payment. And so you can go there and you can select the bills that you want to pay. And what they will do, the consolidator, is they will transmit payment orders to your bank. So they will be entered into the automated clearinghouse, so they'll get paid, after a one-day clearing period. Then, of course, the bank ultimately will be making payments. There's a bank that's omitted here, and that's the biller's bank. So your bank will send money to the biller's bank, which will notify the biller that payment has been made. A simple idea. This is a little more complicated diagram of it. So the biller, of course, has to create the bill. And he's going to have a database of everything that you've bought from him, along with prices, along with terms, like if you're a good customer, you might get a VIP discount or something like that. So he has to create a valid bill. He has to make sure it's correct, and then he has to deliver the bill to you somehow. So this is the biller up here. This is you, the customer. This is ignoring the bill consolidator. Okay, this is just him sends the bill to you. Then, if there's a dispute, you have to initiate. You say, well, something's wrong here. I never got the stuff. And so then there will be a human process back and forth, and that's what goes on up here. But if you review the bill and you like it, then you approve it, and you enter a payment order to cause your bank to make a payment to the biller. When the biller receives it, he has to apply it against your account and make sure that all the records are reconciled, so that the amount he billed you is the amount you paid him. If you pay him less, then you're going to have a balance due. If you paid him more, you're going to have a credit. I mean, people often pay more than they owe. There's good reasons for that. You may be traveling later. You may not be able to pay your next bill on time, so you estimate in advance how much it's going to be, so you don't go delinquent. So there are all kinds of things you can do with this. But what you're seeing here is the payment part, which is what we've talked about, integrates with all this other stuff. It has to integrate with accounts payable and accounts receivable. This Gartner, does a lot of research in IT stuff. And they did a study on what the savings are of EIPP over using paper. So in blue is the paper cost. In beige is the electronic cost. So data entry, how do you enter the data necessary to create the bill? They found that it was about half as much for electronic bills. I'm not exactly sure why. It seems to me that the same information is required for both. Reconciliation, comparing the invoice to the purchase order, was much cheaper electronically, because what happens is, first of all, it can be done electronically, and if there's any discrepancy, then there can be some agent sitting at a terminal seeing both the invoice and the purchase order on the same screen, and makes it very easy for them to reconcile. Whereas if it's pieces of paper, they have to go to filing cabinets and pull pieces of paper out and look at them. Then payment is cheaper because it's automatically initiated electronically. And so they estimated that the savings was over $5 per bill. If you send 100,000 invoices per year, and that's not a lot, consider PCCW and how many they send. If you just send 100,000, you're saving $500,000 by going to EIPP. So it's worth a lot to make an investment in this. So I can give you a demo. Let's see what Metavante has to offer. It worked last night, so it should work today. Okay, so Metavante is a bill consolidator. They accept bills from many billers. They collate them, and they arrange a web page for you. So this is my web page. Not really. I mean, it's the sample web page. This shows that I have a bill from 123 Fitness. Well, you know it's not me if it's from 123 Fitness. AT&T, Best Buy, City Public Service, Continental Landscape. And so there's an amount. Last paid $32. And I can type in an amount, and I can type in a date on which I want it to be paid. If I want to look at the bill, it's a hyperlink, and I can click on it. I'm so afraid of the fitness bill, I'm going to go to AT&T instead. Okay, so payee information. All right, where are we? Apparently there's no amount due yet on this one. There's an amount due on City Public Service. See, there's an amount listed here. There's no amount for these, so there's no current bill. There is a current bill for City Public Service. View bill history. There we go. This is all of the amounts that I have paid. I paid my bill in December. I paid my bill in January. Here's the February bill, which is unpaid. And if I want to see the details, I click on Detail, and it'll show me what all the line items are in the bill. There's a statement of my account. It's for electricity usage. Okay, I look at that, I say, yeah, okay, I use that much. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to pay it. So paid. Good. Then I can go back and I can schedule a payment for whoever else I owe money to. And then when I click Pay Bills, payment orders will be sent to my bank against my account to process ACH credits to pay all of those different billers that I agreed to pay. Now, this is a tremendously more convenient process than having a pile of paper bills on your desk and having to put a stamp on, put the money in an envelope and put a stamp on the envelope and make sure that that little sheet shows through the little window on the envelope so it goes to the right place. This is very fast. And the easier it is for people to pay bills, the more likely they are to do it. And the more likely they are to not delay doing it, which means the billers are going to get paid faster. So it's really, really quite convenient. Let's go back and bill pay. So there's City Public Service, Cox Communications, Mayo Clinic, Target. Those are the currently owed bills. That's for medical services. And it says set up auto pay. That's the concept of EIPP. Now, in reality, it gets a little more complicated. Why? Because billers, I'm an electric company. I'm not a web designer. So in order for somebody to consolidate bills, they have to create them. And they have to create them so they look nice on the web, etc. And most billers don't do that. So what they do is they take the raw bill information and they send it to a service bureau called a biller service provider. Biller service provider, the BSP, provides services to billers. And one of the services they provide is they parse the data, they format the bill, and they host the bill on a server. Why? Because there are these various different consolidators, customer service providers. I might use one, you might use a different one, you might use a third one, and there's no way that the biller is going to maintain information about how to send bills to all these different guys. He wants to send bills to one place. That's the BSP. The BSP's job is to send the bills on to the various consolidators. Now, only one is shown here, but there's not one in the world. I mean, I already showed you two on the previous slide. DotSing is one, and Metavante is another. So what the biller service provider has to know is, for each customer, who is the right consolidator to send the bill to. And so these guys, consolidators, sometimes called customer service providers, they provide services to customers. These guys provide services to billers. So the biller service provider sends the bills to the right customer service provider. This guy is the one who consolidates. That's Metavante you saw there. Metavante takes all the bills and presents on a nice screen so you can see all of your bills and decide which ones to pay. Then the customer decides he wants to pay the bills. In full generality, there's another guy called the customer payment provider who's the one who transmits the payment orders to the bank. In the example I just showed you, Metavante acts as both of these. Metavante presents the bills, but also creates the payment orders. But these guys can be separate entities. Then payment gets entered into a remittance network, and now all kinds of money's coming in to this biller. He's got to reconcile it, so he hires a biller payment provider who takes all of this information and presents him with some database files that can be used to update his accounts receivable system so that all the bills that have been paid are properly marked off as being paid. So in full generality, there are these four guys here. Sometimes they're consolidated. These can be the same. Those two can be the same. Sometimes there are some guys who don't need a biller service provider. They're willing to handle the chore of sending the bills directly to the customer service provider. This is another map of the same thing drawn in a different direction. These are billers on the top. These are customers on the bottom. These lines show you all the different arrangements that there can be among these parties. So this mode over here is the simplest. It's called biller direct. The biller sends the bill directly to the customer. This is common in industry. It used to be called EDI, electronic data interchange, where purchase orders would go over a leased line, for example, from Ford Motor Company to a tire maker. I want to buy, 1 million tires. And then the stuff would come, and then the bill would come back over the same link directly to Ford from the tire maker. So biller direct is common in big industry, and it's also very common in the consumer world, because your electric company bills you directly. It doesn't go through an intermediary. Then, where there's a customer service provider who's aggregating, like Metavante, the biller sends the bill to the aggregator. The aggregator hosts all of the consumer's bills, and various consumers log on to their website and make payments. Then, this is the most complicated one, where you have a biller service provider, a consolidator, a customer service provider, and a customer. And all the different arrangements are possible. It all depends on what chores any particular company is willing to bring on itself. Okay. In the biller direct model, the biller hosts its own site to present bills, or it can actually transmit them directly to the customer. They have to work through a financial institution to reach the settlement system, so whoever is going to pay has to send a payment order to a bank. You can't send a payment directly to the company. It requires payors to visit the biller's site and to do something, which means that if I'm a corporation like Walmart, Walmart buys things from 60,000 different suppliers around the world. That means that if they were using biller direct, they would have to visit 60,000 websites per month to pay all their bills. They would have to have a whole building full of people in some city with clerks sitting at terminals just to do that. Because 60,000 is 2,000 a day they would have to visit. This is not a practical model for somebody who has a huge number of billers. There are various vendors that provide software to assist in internal development of schemes like biller direct, but Walmart doesn't use that. In fact, Walmart requires. Walmart, they're God in the retailing business. If you want to do business with Walmart, and you do, because they'll give you a lot of business. If you want to do business with Walmart, you do it their way. And their way is, the only way you can bill them is to send the bill to their server. If it doesn't go to their server, it's not getting paid. That's all there is to that. So they don't have to visit 60,000 different servers. They visit one server, their own. Okay? I had a friend I went to high school with. This person, I've been to more years of school with this person than anybody on earth, because we met in elementary school. He ultimately became a manufacturer of sieves. A sieve is I'm trying to think of another word for it. It's like a filter. When you take spaghetti out of the pot and you want to drain the water from it, you put it in a sieve and the water falls through and the spaghetti stays there. And they come in all different hole sizes depending on what you want to filter out. He manufactured these things in New York City. And Walmart was his biggest customer by far. That's almost all of his stuff went to Walmart. And for years, he kept asking them, the cost of living has gone up. I have to pay my employees more. The rent went up. I have to raise my price. And they said, no. If you raise your price, we're not buying from you anymore. And eventually, they put him out of business. And you would think if you're Walmart, it doesn't make sense to destroy your suppliers. But it does if there's a cheaper supplier somewhere. And if you can still get the goods and you don't have to pay a higher price, you'll do it. And that's what Walmart does. I'm not endorsing this, but that's the way they are. Okay, so here's the new model. This is buyer direct. Okay, this is what Walmart uses. In the B2B setting, it's similar to biller direct, except the billers are required to post their invoices to a server at the buyer. So in this case, the buyer is Walmart. And if you want to sell to Walmart, you got to send your invoice directly to their server. Okay? In that sense, the buyer acts as his own consolidator because it all shows up on his server, and he can review all the bills, which is important if you're getting 60,000 bills a month. FI stands for financial institution. So this is the payment rectangle. The buyer, the seller, the buyer's bank, and the seller's bank. The only thing that disturbs the rectangle is sometimes these FIs are the same bank. If they're the same bank, then it's really a payment triangle. The buyer, the seller, and the common bank of them. Now, what about Bitcoin? At the beginning of the course, I said there's always a payment rectangle. Is there a payment rectangle with Bitcoin? The answer is, in a sense, there is. It's like the payment triangle, in which there's been a consolidation of the financial institutions. So here is the buyer, and here is the seller. But there's the Bitcoin network. There are no direct purse-to-purse transactions. That does not occur in Bitcoin. The only way that it occurs is there's a transmission of a transaction into the Bitcoin network, and then there's a verification, and then there's essentially a notification to the seller, you've got the money. It's in the Bitcoin network. This is very much like the situation in which the buyer's bank and the seller's bank are the same bank. There's a third party involved. It's not a party, it's a network. And so you don't have there's no direct purse-to-purse. If I have a Bitcoin wallet and you have a Bitcoin wallet, I cannot transfer Bitcoin to you directly from my wallet to your wallet. It's not possible, otherwise it would never get into the blockchain. Okay, biller service providers. They act as agents for billers. They technically enable EIPP. By technically, I mean they have the technology to do it. They warehouse invoice data. So the billing data goes to the biller service provider, and they can provide payment and remittance processing if they're also the consolidator. But basically, their job is to turn the bills into something viewable. They have all the logos and the graphics and the formatting, and they know what to do to make the bills good. Payment consolidators are the ones that accept all these bills. Now, these bills are in all different formats, because your electric bill does not look like your telephone bill. And so when you get a bill, you can tell immediately from the look of it who it's from. And so what happens is, back when I did the Metavante demo, each bill looked like the bill of that biller. They didn't all have the same uniform format, because that would disturb you very much. You wouldn't know if the bill was legitimate. So the payment consolidator has to make sure that all these different bills that are coming are presented to you so they look just right to you, otherwise they know you're not going to pay them. And the whole idea of this is to speed up payment, not to slow it down. So the payment consolidators often also act as your agent for introducing payment orders into the bank. That's the case where the consolidator acts as the customer payment provider. And that's the demo I gave you with Metavante. So the consolidator model, bills from many billers are presented on one consolidated site. The banks want to host that. The reason the bank wants to do that is it's an inducement for you to keep money in the bank. Because if you're going to pay bills out of an account, you have to have enough money to pay the bills. And so if a bank offers a wonderful bill consolidation service, then you'll tend to use that bank, and you'll tend to keep a lot of money in there so you can pay your bills. And banks want money because once you deposit money, it becomes an asset of the bank. And assets of the bank are real money, and they send it to the central bank, and it raises their balance in the central bank, and they can lend it out that night, and they love you if you're going to deposit money. So a lot of banks are competing with one another to offer these bill consolidation services, because once you have a third party, then they've lost control of your money. They have control of your money if the money's in that bank. The benefit to you, the payer, is one-stop bill payment. You visit one site, all your bills are there, and ta-da, everything's wonderful. Problem is that you got to have all of your billers send the bills to the consolidator. Otherwise, you'll see 30 bills on that consolidator's site, and then there might be 10 bills on somebody else's site and 5 bills on somebody else's site, and it's no longer good for you. You want everything consolidated in one place. So the key to the success of this is a critical mass of billers. If 90% of your billers are on the Metavante site, you'll use it. If 5% of your billers are on there, you're not going to use it because you have to visit too many sites. Bill consolidation, real simple thing. The customer visits the aggregator and consolidator are the same thing. The aggregator collects all your bills together. You view the bills, you approve, and the aggregator sends payment orders to your bank, and then it goes through the ACH. You get paid. Now, new concept. Thick versus thin. Thick consolidation or thin consolidation. In thick consolidation, all of the information, both the summary of the bill, like how much you owe for this month, and all the detail information, the individual line items, the calls that you made, or the individual credit card purchases you made, all of that goes to the consolidator. My suspicion is that Metavante is a thick consolidator because I had all the information about those bills on there, and there wasn't much delay when I clicked on a bill before I saw the PDF. However, in thin consolidation, I mean, that's a lot of data because the detail of a bill is much bigger than the bill itself. Furthermore, it contains a lot of private stuff. It tells everything you bought. And sometimes, you can't keep that from your biller. He knows what you bought because he gave it to you. But maybe you don't want the consolidator knowing all that about you. They can run neural networks. They can do all kinds of processing on that. They can sell the data. It's terrible. So a lot of billers don't want the consolidator knowing the details. Well, if they don't know the details, then how are you going to see the details? Here's how. In thin consolidation, only summary data goes to the consolidator, but there are URL links in the summary, like detail. Click here. When you click, that URL points to a biller server. The biller server maintains the detail data, so the consolidator never sees it. It pops up on your screen, but he doesn't see it because you got it through a URL. Thin consolidation means much less load on the consolidator because he's not hosting all the data, but now there's a load back on the biller because he's got to keep a server with a database that has all your details. So it's a choice. It depends on the nature of the data, how private it is, what the customers want, what charge the consolidator is going to make. It's much cheaper to do thin consolidation. That is, the fee that the consolidator charges is much less for this than for thick. Both are used. eBids. eBids is a system in which billing can occur by ACH. So in ACH, remember there are at least two kinds of transactions. One is pushing money. If I want to pay you, that's called a credit transfer or an ACH credit, pushing money out. The reverse is an ACH debit, which is grabbing money from somebody, which seems very dangerous because how many people do you want with the ability to grab money out of your bank account? Usually it's only a few. Often you're willing to let your landlord do it. Yeah. But understand that because there are both debits and credits, there's an information flow that goes through the automated clearinghouse. And that information flow, somebody brilliant at the clearinghouse figured out that you could bill by ACH. Instead of just grabbing money, what I can do is send an invoice along with my request to grab, so you know what I'm grabbing for. So in this situation, the consumer, you, who have a bank, this is the buyer, the seller, the buyer's bank, the seller's bank, and then here's the ACH operator who runs the clearinghouse. You, the consumer, enroll in with your bank through your consumer financial institution to receive summary bills from billers via ACH using ENR, automatic enrollment entry. I'm not sure why it's called ENR. It should be AEE, but they call it ENR. I think ENR stands for enrollment. Okay. Then what happens is billers need to acknowledge these enrollment requests. So when I enroll, I say, I want to receive bills through ACH. Then the billers have to agree that they're going to send the bills through ACH. Otherwise, I'm not going to get them. The biller can confirm or reject an enrollment using an ACH record. He can say back, I'm sorry, we don't do this. Or, oh, wonderful. From now on, we'll bill you through ACH. Then 3, bill presentment. The biller routes the consumer's next bill to the consumer's financial institution using this $0 CTX transaction. That is a transaction through the automated clearinghouse that does not involve a money transfer. It's a data transfer. Okay? The summary bill is embedded into an addendum record along with this corporate trade exchange message. So this zero value message comes with a big bill attached, and that's routed back to the consumer financial institution, which then puts it up on a web page so that you can go and view all the bills. And the banks love this because they become your consolidator, which means you've got to keep a lot of money in the bank to pay your bills. So the banks love it. That's why the ACH instituted it, because ACHs are basically operated by their member banks. Then you connect to your consumer financial institution website, like DaSing, for example, to view your summary bills, and then you click on which bills you want to pay. And then they'll be paid through ACH. So the bills come through ACH, and the money goes through ACH. Think of it like a kind of a mini SWIFT for consumers. You can't be on SWIFT, because that requires the secure non-internet connection to SWIFT. But you can easily be on this, because this is just internet. Okay. How to integrate payments with upstream processes. What's an upstream process? What does upstream mean? It means something that happened before. Downstream is something that happens later. Consider the flow of water. Upstream is where the water has been. Downstream is where the water is going. Okay? So there are upstream processes that occur before payment. For example, sending a bill is upstream, right? It had to occur before you're going to make the payment. So here is a corporate buyer, not a consumer. Here is a corporate seller. Now this is very interesting. There's a wonderful, beautiful symmetry here. A buyer has a purchasing department. Purchasing department is authorized to send purchase orders. They have catalogs. They go out and get bids. They compare prices on particularly, you want laser pointers? They'll go out and look at all the different laser pointer makers and find the prices of the laser pointers. So they can advise people in the company as to where we can get the best price. They will negotiate discounts, volume discounts. They're good. I mean, that's what their career is. Then there's a receiving department. These are associated with the loading dock. When stuff comes in, they open it, they look at the documents, they check it, they see if anything's damaged, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's accounts payable. These are important folks because they have call on the company's money. They can actually cause money to leave the company accounts. All right. That's on the buyer's side. On the seller's side, the beauty here is to each one of these, it's Newton's third law thing. For every one of these, there's one of these over here. Who does the purchasing department interact with? They interact with the sales department, right? They're negotiating discounts. They're saying, you know, if we buy this much, what discount can we get? How fast can we get it? Et cetera. The receiving department, their counterpart is the guys who sent the stuff. So the shipping and invoicing department sends the stuff, and the receiving department receives it. The accounts payable over here, their correspondent is the accounts receivable department. These are the guys who are supposed to get the money. These are the people who are supposed to send the money. So it's symmetric. Lovely. Now, in order to buy something, you got to have a purchase order, and purchase orders always have purchase order numbers. You don't have a purchase order, you're not buying anything. Because the seller needs to know he's going to get paid. He needs to know that there's a contractual obligation of the buyer to pay. Okay. Now, it turns out in some situations, it's very common actually, all you really need is the number. You can't ever buy anything without a purchase order number. But you can actually buy without a purchase order. Because once there's a number, and that's been dedicated to this transaction, the details can be filled in later. But without a number, there's no entry that can be made in either guy's system, because the number is a key into a database. So very often, when I used to buy stuff, I would call up and we'd talk about it, and the guy would say, well, do you have a purchase order number for me? Yeah, here's the number. Oh, that's okay. If I didn't have a purchase order number, they cannot make an entry into their ERP system. They don't know how to do it. All right. So the purchase order goes to the sales department. At the same time, the purchasing department sends the purchase order to the receiving department, because when the stuff comes, it has to be compared with the purchase order to make sure we really bought it. If we didn't buy it, we don't want to pay for it. Even if we got it, we don't want to pay for it. The sales department then sends the purchase order to the shipping and invoicing department. And the shipping and invoicing department is then going to ship, and along with the shipment, they're going to send an invoice. It may not physically be with the shipment. It may be sent by mail or electronically, but they do the invoicing. Then this purchase order number has to be on the invoice. Otherwise, there's no possibility of reconciling anything. So the invoice has an invoice number and a purchase order number. Those are critical, because the purchase order number is assigned by the buyer, but the invoice number is assigned by the seller. So they're not the same number, but they're correlated with each other. Now, once the shipping and invoicing department sends this bill, puts the invoice number on there, and then sends a copy of the bill to accounts receivable, because now the company is entitled to the money. Okay? These get received by the receiving department, which checks the goods that came against the purchase order, because this PO number is enough to correlate with the purchase order that's already in their records. So they verify that the stuff actually came. Then they notify the buyer, we got it, come collect it, it's here. And they notify accounts payable, uh-oh, we now owe money, because we really did get the stuff and you're going to have to pay. And so now accounts payable will send an advice of payment to accounts receivable, along with a number of the payment that they sent to the bank. So when they send their payment order to the bank, they get a number. They tell the accounts receivable department, we have ordered our bank to pay this invoice, and furthermore, our payment number is this, so when you get it, when you get that payment, you'll know that it's for that invoice. Now, accounts receivable can reconcile all of this stuff when the money comes. So that goes to accounts receivable, and they're going to be happy the moment the money arrives. When the money arrives, they're going to mark the invoice as paid, so you're not going to keep getting bothered every month, like, why didn't you pay the bill? You did pay the bill. Then accounts receivable is going to notify shipping that we've paid. And the sales department, of course, is going to get notified too, because they're going to get their commission. All right. Cloud invoicing. This is from a company called iPayables. It's just what you think. It's all of the above, except the information is kept in the cloud. So here are various ways in which vendors, these are the sellers, can submit information about invoices. They can send it by FTP, they can send batch files, they can do entry online, they can do barcode scans, QR code scans, however. It goes into the cloud. Electronic invoicing is going to occur from there. There's POs or non-POs. So you don't send purchase orders to your electric company. You signed a contract with them when you got electrical service. They just send bills. You don't have to send them a purchase order. So there's a lot of billing. Consumer billing is not tied to purchase orders. Corporate billing is tied to purchase orders. Where there are purchase orders, there has to be matching. You have to match the invoice to the purchase order. So there's two-way matching and there's three-way matching. Okay? So purchase order matching to invoices is called two-way matching. Receiving to purchase order matching to invoices is three-way matching. That means there has to be a PO, the invoice has to correspond to the PO, but we also had to have received the goods. So that's three checks that have to be done instead of two. Then, of course, since all of this is accessing information from the cloud, it's always there all the time, except one day a year if you're using Amazon Web Services. And payments can occur much faster, which means they can get their 2% 10 discount, which is a tremendous benefit to payers. Okay. We'll go through what HSBC does. It's pretty clever. And then we'll take a break. So HSBC is a consolidator. And they are a thin consolidator because they don't want to have all the details. They don't want to be responsible for hackers breaking in and taking the details. So you're a customer of HSBC. You visit an HSBC website that stores bill summary information, which is regularly updated. It's not updated every second. It's updated every certain amount of time. Okay? So you log on to HSBC with single sign-on. Well, once you do single sign-on, it means that you can access any of the bank's services without, again, having to log in and give your password. Then you view your bills through their website. If you want details, so if you click the link that says Bill Details, HSBC doesn't have them. What it does, though, is it passes back to you a secure token, a string, a nonce. It's going to send you back a nonce. And then your PC is going to redirect to the biller website that has the bill details, and it's going to pass the token down to the biller. And the biller is going to verify the token. How does the biller know the token's legitimate? Because HSBC is in contact with the biller. It says, I just sent Seamus this token. If somebody presents that token, send in the bill details. Otherwise, if they don't have that token, don't give them the details. Otherwise, if you knew the secrets, I mean, if you knew the URLs of the website, you could get anybody's bill details if there weren't some security associated with it. And so you don't want to have to log on here. You don't have an account with every one of these billers for logging in. Otherwise, every bill that you wanted to look at, you'd have to type in some different username and password. To avoid that, you just get a secure token, and your browser redirects directly. You don't even know this is going on. Your browser passes the token to the biller. It's in the URL. Okay. So HSBC, their model is they do direct billing, but they also work with other aggregators. So for example, they handle PCCW bills. You can get those aggregated by HSBC. They also work with other aggregators, some of whom do thin consolidation, some of whom do thick consolidation. But their job is to provide you with a one-stop website for EIPP. So if HSBC doesn't have the bill, it gets the bill from the other aggregator. So they try to be very comprehensive about it. Why? Because they're a bank, and they want you to keep your money there, and you need money to pay your bills. And while that money is accumulating, waiting for you to pay your bills, they're making money on it. It's totally legal, completely legitimate. All right, let's take a break.